It's a product review, and today we're looking at a programmable watering timer. So this is a Parkside watering timer that I bought from Lidl for $12.99. And you may recall last year I tried to solve the problem of watering my tomatoes when I was away using this thing, which is a little programmable timer pump, because I didn't have a pressurized water supply at the upstairs greenhouse. And so this thing is got a little diaphragm pump in there, and it's got a timer that can be set for a number of seconds. And you don't set a date or time in there. You just, when you switch it on, it runs for the number of seconds you've set. Then 24 hours later, it does that again, and so on. That was kind of okay, except that it's battery powered and you can't charge it at the same time as using it. You have to take it off to charge it. So it can't be left unattended for a long time. And because of the small bore of the tubing for the pump, it can't really be easily just attached to a very large, like, rainwater butt or something like that, because it would just get clogged up. Anyway, so that was kind of okay. It kept my tomato plants alive. I wouldn't say it kept them thriving. This, however, fits on a tap. And so this isn't a pump. This just turns the water on and off. And so I'd have to run a hose from the tap to the greenhouse. Now, why am I using this when I couldn't use one of these last year? Well, we've had the builders in, which is why I'm at a different table today, by the way. And while they were here, I added an extra little job on to fit an extra outside tap upstairs. Okay, so here's what we get in the box. We do get batteries with it, that's good. We get the pump unit itself, which looks to be, oh, it looks like that screws onto the tap directly. It's got a little filter in there already. And then that's a hose lock type connector on the bottom there, which also unscrews. So presumably you could fix other kinds of thread compatible. I think that's a 3/4 inch thread. Looks like you could have fixed other things on there instead. So battery hatches underneath, display, and then it's got a on-off switch and a knob, and apparently it's got an easy to operate menu and a button, I think, just to override it and say, give me some water. Here's the manual. Programmable watering timer. Half of the manual is in English. The other half is in German. Lots of blurb on the box, actually, by the way, which is in multiple languages. So anyway, let's just have a look at the features that it claims to have. So, programmable irrigation, 6 schedules. So you can set 6 different times for it to go off. Flow rate, approximately 50 litres per minute. Irrigation duration, minimum 1 minute, maximum 9 hours and 59 minutes. Now, we could still run into problems with this. Not technical problems so much as legal problems, because we do have hosepipe bans, because this product requires the use of a hosepipe. And I imagine that means it does fall under hosepipe bans when those are things that happen. So if we have drought conditions here in the UK, it's not uncommon for there to be a hosepipe ban, which means you can't use a hosepipe for watering your garden. You can fill up a watering can from a tap and use that, but the idea is that hosepipes are banned. And notionally, because I think it means, you know, hosepipe's an easy thing to just leave running, isn't it? And people might put the lawn sprinkler on or whatever and leave it running. And hosepipes are just a way of consuming a lot of water without perhaps realizing how much you actually are consuming. Anyway, water, I think, costs me about £4 something per cubic meter. I did look at the possibility of getting one of those big IBC, you know, those pallet-sized caged bottles for transporting liquids. I was going to get one and use that for storing rainwater, but I just figured that I'd have to pump it to the IBC from all of the water butts that collect the downpipes from the house. And when that's full, that IBC, that's 1,000 litres, which is a cubic metre, that would save me £4. So it's difficult to justify, whilst I do use rainwater collection where I can, it's difficult to kind of justify expending a lot of money on doing that. There's the unit. Display is nice and clear. Well, the days of the week across there, that's presumably time. Program 1, there's duration and something else. So I'm going to just break the video for a minute while I go and read the instructions and try and digest that. and then we'll be back. Okay, well, it says it's intuitive, and I'm inclined to agree, actually. It's pretty good. So we can get into various different modes. We can set time or set the different programs. It's just a case of click until something flashes, and then use the dial to select something. It is 14:52 on Monday. Okay, and then it wants me to set program 1. This manual, by the way, is really interesting. So there's a diagram of what all the controls are and a diagram of how you might use it. And then some examples of display, and then 20 pages of safety stuff, and then the actual instructions, which only really go on for about 3 or 4 pages. So yeah, so I've set the time and day of week. Programming for automatic watering. So it is a little bit clunky. It doesn't seem like there's a back button, which means if you miss something, you've got to go all the way around again, but that's hardly an issue. What's the difference between watering duration and irrigation time? I need to go and read this a bit more. Back in a moment. Right, okay, well, this is interesting. So what we've got, if I just have a look at program 2. So there's actually a double setting for each program, and it's quite cool, actually. So there's the watering duration. So I could set this for 6 o'clock and have the watering duration for 1 hour, say. Then the irrigation interval and the pause interval are inside of that. So I could configure this. Let me see if I can describe this properly. So if I set this to go for an hour from 6 o'clock, I could have it watering for that whole hour, but watering for 1 minute, then pausing for 2 minutes, then watering for another minute, then pausing for 2 minutes for the full duration of that hour. Which is quite useful, actually, I suppose, because, you know, if you've got something where you want to water thoroughly, but you also want to allow time for the water to soak in, that might help. Okay, well, that seems to be relatively straightforward. I've set program 2. I think really the only thing to do is to take it outside and we'll give it a test attached to the hose. Okay, I'm going to test it on this outside tap just because it's easier to record footage standing here than where the other one's located. So I've set it for 5 minutes. I've just got to change the time on that. So we'll cycle all the way through that. Not very easy to see the highlights. There are tiny little outlines around those raindrops. Right, I'll change the time. Right. That is now programmed. Come on, 15:13. And all I'm going to do is use it to fill up the watering can for the moment, just for the purposes of this demonstration. So this tap is turned on. This thing controls the flow. Right, we can see the little watering icons come on, and a second later, got water flowing. As well as a bit of leaking from... that wasn't clipped on properly. Okay, now this is going to water for 5 minutes, which is not necessarily what I want, because that watering can obviously hasn't got capacity for that much water. So I can just override this program now by pressing and holding that button, and it cancels the flow. That cancels this program, or cancels this iteration of this program. So that's good. And again, to override it as well, press and hold, and it will just run. Oh, and I can choose how long I want that to run for. So that's just like a manual one-off watering. That's quite useful, actually, to be able to have it on a time like that. And that will run for a minute and then stop. I'm not going to test that because my watering can's about to overflow, so I'm just going to stop that manually. There we go, and water stops. So that appears to work. Now, of course, at the moment, that's not a lot of use when it's just attached to a hose, because I want the water to come out in several different places. So I've bought something else to go with this that we will also look at installing in the greenhouse. And the battery life ought to be pretty good on this, because as opposed to the previous solution, which had to run a little pump to pump the water from the charge that's in the battery, all this thing's got to do is open and close a valve. And so the battery life on this ought to be a fair bit better. So that turns the water on and off. But I don't just want a hose pipe full of water coming out of the greenhouse. What I want is water distributed to each of 12 tomato plants and possibly 1 or 2 other things as well. So how do we do that? And the answer is this. So this is just something I ordered for Amazon. And it's a kit of water distribution nozzles and various valves to fit onto things. Looks like a little roll of tape. So there's plastic tubing and a whole lot of little T valves and then watering nozzles. So that will push, that little barbed connector there will push into the end of that tube. Probably warm that tube up in some warm water first to make it pliable before I do that. And then we cut lengths of this tube and make a distribution thing a bit like this. So it looks like maybe you can actually just have it running like this through these T pieces off to the nozzles. So you can have one run that goes all the way around the greenhouse with short pieces that go off to each nozzle. Probably makes a little bit more sense than what I had before, which was every time you wanted more nozzles, you divided it. So you had a piece of tube that came down here and then 2 pieces of tube and then 2 more of these further down, so you got 4, so you doubled it every iteration. But this looks like it can be done the other way. So I think we'll get that set up in the greenhouse. So yeah, this tubing's a little bit stiff in the first instance. As it comes out of the pack, it's a little bit stiff. And getting those barbed things in there, I imagine they probably would push in okay, but that can be made slightly easier just by dunking the end in some hot water, just to soften the plastic, and that has made a big difference. And so now, yeah, that quite easily pushes onto there. Right, that's the bit on there. That's the hose end. So this is the bit that's going to be at the greenhouse door. Now I've got to go and do all the other bits. Right, I don't know how much of this you're actually going to be able to make out, but anyway, so that's the end that attaches to the hose. We're going to give that a little bit of slack there at the end. And then it has to get to these tomato halos here. So the first one is going to be cut about there. And I've got a T-piece on the T like that. So we will start 2 runs, just to kind of equalise the pressure a little bit, hopefully. So it will come in the door here, it will divide in 2 directions to do the tomatoes on this side and the tomatoes on that side. Now it did occur to me, I've talked about topologies of watering here. One way I could do this is actually to put a loop, to create a loop all the way around the greenhouse. So I was just going to do 2 legs, 2 sort of branching arms of watering, but if I join them up at the far end, which I will do I think if I've got enough tubing, then if we get a blockage on one leg, the water can still flow all the way around the system the other way, so we will get a modicum of redundancy. Okay, this is what I've got so far. So one piece of pipe comes in, splits into 2, and each of these legs has at the moment just got 6 little T pieces, including the one at the end, on it. I'm just going to go and offer that up in the greenhouse, make sure it actually fits the layout, make sure I've made my calculations correct. I hope I have. Avoiding fence post errors, there are 6 tomato plants on each side. That means there are 5 gaps between tomato plants. Yep, so measure twice, cut once actually worked. So we've got one leg goes down here, and the nozzles are about the right spacing for these watering halos, and the same on the other side. So it goes down this side all the way to the end. Further progress, so water comes in, splits into 2 sides, 6 watering points down the side here, a further 2 on the end, which is just set off at a slightly greater distance because that's got to get back into the middle, and then each one of those watering points is going to get a little spur like that with a watering nozzle on the end. Back in a moment when that's done. So yeah, there is that. Let's go and get it fitted in place in the greenhouse. Okay, so that little nozzle, each of those nozzles is going to get clipped onto the rim of the tomato halo, just with one of these little clips. And those nozzles are way down inside of the thing. So there's room for me to pull them out like that to adjust them. I'm going to start with a quarter turn backed off and we'll see how we go. So just do that one as well. So done all the way up and then a quarter turn. Put it in there like that. Okay, I'll get the rest of them done up and then we'll fire it up and see what it's like. I'm just going to go and turn on the tap. We're not using a timer in this test, but if I'm right, and I am never wrong, we will see some water coming out of these nozzles in a moment. Okay, that's just the air coming through the system, and there's some leakage here because this is an old hose reel, but that won't be the case with the new one. So we should have water coming out of these nozzles. Let's have a look. Yep. So I'm just going to go around now and balance these so that they're all watering at approximately the same rate. Yep, so that's how you balance them. Close them all up, then start from the far end. So that was just the calibration test, but it works. And my tomatoes have been watered, probably a little bit more than I would normally water them this morning. So I will do another calibration test this evening with this setup. And while I'm watering that time, I'll just go around and give the nozzles a little tweak so that they're watering evenly and we're all getting a fair amount of water and no plant is getting neglected. So slight adjustments. I put a longer piece of tube in the middle there and longer spurs on these bits for the peppers, just so there's no tight pipe at this end. Those are still stopped up tight, so those won't water until I open them up a bit. Anyway, it's nearly lunchtime and it's way too warm to be working inside the greenhouse. Now Mad Dog's an Englishman, so I'm going to retire indoors for some lunch, and then I think we'll wrap up this video and I'll give you my opinions of these two things that I've bought. Right, so bearing in mind this is just the kind of unboxing, first impressions, initial testing video. I can't show you the long-term test of this because I only just bought it. I'm very pleased with this. It's a nice solid unit, nice clear display with one exception, which I'll get to in a minute. And it seems to work really well, and the programmability of it is really flexible. So you've got these 6 programs, and the programs are to operate for a duration, and then within that duration you can have pauses and watering repeatedly. Ample capacity really for any watering pattern you might possibly want on one set of devices. So all in all, really pleased with that, and for $12.99 from the middle of Lidl, how can you complain? It supposedly has a 3-year warranty. Instructions are nice and clear. Warnings are a bit funny actually. Lots of exclamatory warnings. Danger to life and risk of accident for infants and children. Risk of death and electric shock! Exclamation mark. Danger to life, danger of explosion. Most of these things are about what happens if you put water where water doesn't belong, like on electrical fittings, which is not so much anything to do with this device, it's what you might do with this device. Anyway, yeah, really happy with that. And of course the watering system, the watering tube system, it's a bunch of tubes and nozzles. It was quite easy to put together. It was the right capacity for what I need. There's a few spare bits left over. No complaints on that front. Right, everything's drained away from the previous watering and it's had a few hours to soak in as well. So I'm going to do another test now. So everything's plugged into the hose. This is still a somewhat temporary setup, but it is representative of what we might be doing. There is quite a long run to where the new outside tap is, just because of how far away the greenhouse is from the house. So this time I'm gonna test it with the timer on there. So yeah, this is the upstairs outdoor tap in the upstairs garden. Okay, so switched on, programmed for 14:56 for 2 minutes. That should click on any moment now. Right, there it goes. Let us follow the water. So we should have water coming out of nozzles here. And we have. That one's a little bit slow. Let's just open them up.
Okay, I've got water going into all of the... Yeah, that's water going into all of them. Okay. Right, I think that has stopped watering. And that looked about right to me. So I think we'll leave it at 2 minutes. So I'm going to go back and set the thing now for 2 minutes in the evening, and I think 1 minute in the morning.
So I do only have one small criticism of this thing, and it's so trifling I almost didn't mention it, but I will because I want to try to be fair and open and honest. The display here is really clear except for these little raindrop icons. And when you're programming it, see if I can get into the programming mode. So there is a little line flashing around that raindrop icon there. Can you see that? It's really rather thin, and the reason it's like that is because it's meant to indicate whether it's not watering, so it's an empty raindrop, or a filled in raindrop. But that flashing line around there, it really is rather faint, and if your eyesight is not 100%, and mine isn't, that can be quite difficult to see in challenging lighting conditions. So just a tiny criticism, that part of the display is a little bit difficult to read, but you can do the programming indoors under adequate light with your reading specs on. So not really an actual practical problem because you don't program it bending over at the tap. You program it indoors in adequate lighting conditions. But tiny little bit more design thought could have gone into that, maybe made that a little bit more legible. But given that's my only complaint about this unit, and it's such a trifling one I almost didn't mention it, I would say overall I'm really happy with this. And obviously I think a video showing you weeks and weeks of realistic testing would be of greater value than this one. This is really just unboxing, first impressions. What's it like to set up? How good is the manual? How easy is it to program? And it is actually intuitive, as they say. I wasn't going to use this on an everyday basis. I was only going to use this when we go away on holiday or something, but I think I will use it for a few weeks and we'll see how it performs. That I will report back about in my random stuff episodes, so watch out for that. But for now, really happy with that purchase. I hope this has been useful. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.